All right, wait for a couple more people to hop in. Appreciate you all for coming on to this very late impromptu episode of the show. Honestly, was going to wait to have this episode, but I literally mentioned multiple times on the one that I just published that if Frank Anselem were to commit on Tuesday evening, we would have an episode. So here we are. So wait just a little bit longer, waiting for some people to file on in. Like I said, no very late notice, but we move regardless. So let's see. Make sure I got everything. Statistical. Here we go. All right. All right. We should be ready to go here in just a second. All right, here we go. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're explaining how Pat Kelsey put together a fantastic roster in his first full offseason as the Cardinals head coach. That said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. For those who don't know who I am, this is my third year hosting Locked On Louisville. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinals Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. The Louisville roster is now full, or is it? Regardless, Pat Kelsey has put together a fantastic roster in his first offseason as the Cardinals head coach. We'll explain what I like the most about this roster. We will go more in depth on the most recent commitment. Frank Anselem from Georgia has committed to the Cardinals program on Tuesday evening. But are the Cardinals done yet? To conclude the show, we'll explain why they could still add one more player. But we begin with the big news. The big news is that Pat Kelsey is absolutely cooking with gas. The fire alarm is going off. Kelsey has been on the job for give or take about 60 days. And in that time, he has put together a full roster of 13 new players, and he's done so adding star caliber players, possible starters, and meaningful depth. I am a huge fan of what Kelsey has done in the portal. Not only has he added extremely talented players, right? But on top of that, it legitimately feels like these pieces fit together. Now, granted, the main test is going to be here in about 6 months when this team actually takes the court, and we'll see what exactly happens this year. That is going to be the ultimate test. But on May 21st, all you really have at this point is hypotheticals. It's discussion. It is, analyzing from afar. And if you have any comments or questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. Appreciate you all tuning into this really impromptu episode of the show. But the main thing that I like is when you replace a whole team, beggars can't really be choosers, right? You have to take what you can get. Yes, you want to prioritize certain players over others, but at the end of the day, it is no tall task to literally have to replace all 13 players, and Pat Kelsey was tasked with doing just that. Thankfully, right away, he went out and he got some difference makers committed. Terrence Edwards Jr., the Sun Belt Player of the Year, he made his commitment fairly early on in the process, and I think that relieved some of the fan base's tension. It showed that, hey, Kelsey's for real. I know that this fan base has PTSD from what we've heard that, oh, yeah, Louisville's involved with multiple players. You still have to close on those recruitments, and the Cardinals did that. fairly early on. But even with the amount of needs that the team had, I still felt like the construction of the roster, it made sense on paper. Like, you look at the skill sets, and I really do think that the presumed style of play that Pat Kelsey likes to go with is reflected by this roster. Again, 3 categories here: star players, starters, and depth. Star players meaning, your number 1, your number 2 scoring priorities. If you were to tell me before the offseason that Pat Kelsey would get commitments from Chucky Hepburn, Terrence Edwards Jr., and Kason Pryor, and those would be the likely top 3 scoring options next season, I would be over the moon. Hell, I still am. I think that those 3 scoring options can definitely lead your team not only into the tournament, but theoretically into that second weekend, maybe further. Don't want to put the cart before the horse, but you have a good amount of star power right out of the gate with the scoring options. Not only that, but you have multiple starting caliber level players, not just 5. You have more than that. Like on the episode that I just had discussing 3 possible starting lineups, that is just a handful of starting lineups. So there are so many more different combinations. Like, yes, you have those 3, but then you have Corin Johnson from Washington, who won Pac-12 Sixth Man of the Year. He was arguably the Huskies' best player down the stretch. Javon Hadley from Colorado averaged 12 and 6 on a tournament team for the Buffaloes, and ultimately is able to switch the 2 through the 4. Noah Waterman averaged 9 and 5 for a very solid BYU team in a very good conference. And then there's a bunch of different players. You've got the leading scorer from Charleston and Rain Smith. You've got some players that know what Pat Kelsey wants to bring to the table. James Scott. I know Kobe Rogers and Ali Khalifa won't be playing this year, but solid players there. And then you have meaningful depth. Abubakar Traore from Long Beach State, I feel like will be a solid addition in the front court. Whether he's playing the 3 or the 4, his skill set will be able to find time on the court. Kenai Roots. One thing we're severely downplaying is that Roots, by the rating, is a top 10 recruit all time for Louisville. He's a top 35 prospect, ranked like 98 on 24/7 Sports. He's literally number 8 or number 9 in the all-time rankings. Like, he's being overshadowed a little bit, obviously, because of the great portal season that the Cardinals have had thus far. You have 11 very solid players that I feel like are going to play a key role. And then you have 2 that are being held for next year that are redshirting. I know there are some conflicting opinions about that, but one thing that also kind of gets lost in the sauce here is that Pat Kelsey brought in immediate help. Whether it's young players, veteran guys, immediate help is on the way. Louisville, the expectation is getting back into the tournament. I would argue that with this team, you need to make it to the second weekend, but we're not going to discuss high expectations at the moment. That's going to be for a different day. Immediate help is on the way, but low-key, Pat Kelsey also set this team up to not have to replace all 13 players after next season. Keeping Ali Khalifa and Kobe Rogers on the team, despite them not playing, it's one of those things. It's like the stock market. You're not going to appreciate the money that you put into stocks right away, but when you see the return on investment years down the road, then you're like, damn, I'm really glad that I put, that money into those stocks. Sort of same guideline here is that you're not going to see the immediate impact that Rogers and Khalifa play, but 2 veteran guys that will impact your team in 2025, 2026. That's pretty key. And then you have some other players like James Scott, Corin Johnson, Kenai Roots will all have multiple years of eligibility after this season. The kicker here is that you have to retain your roster, but that goes without saying. I like that you address the immediacy or I don't even know if that's a word, immediacy. It is now. Put it in Merriam-Webster. You got immediate help, but you also sort of helped your team for the long run. Like, you'll still have to utilize the portal and bring in some high school recruits for the 2025-26 season, but you are putting yourself in a situation where you might not have to replace all 13 guys, and that is the key thing there. You take a lot of pressure off yourself and the coaching staff. So I really, really like this roster. It's being revered as one of, if not the top transfer portal class in the country. I truly believe that it definitely is top 3 at the very worst. But Louisville did add its final, or maybe final, player to the team, Frank Anselem from Georgia. Some are sort of wondering why Louisville would go get this commitment. I'm okay with it, and I'm going to explain to you why, and also catch up on the comment section here in just a moment after I tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. It helps you find professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You know, I really do appreciate you all for tuning into this rather impromptu live edition of the show. I do want to express my gratitude. We'll go to the comment section really quickly. Eric Goode, I really wanted on Yesu. Yes, I do agree there. Also, he might even stay in the draft. Brian Stickler, I'm just glad the roster's done. Is it, though? Red State says, maybe we're done. Key emphasis on the word maybe. Old School Coin says, hell yeah, finally made it live. Appreciate you tuning in. Brian says, I saw an article that has us as the 4th best team in ACC power rankings. Just addressed that in the most recent episode that I published like less than an hour ago. So be sure to tune into that. Chris Steyer saw where we made contact with the kid that decommitted from Stanford. My understanding, he just committed to BYU. Eric says, are we going to beat Kentucky this year? I sure as hell hope so. Brian says, we have to replace 8 next year, but I'm not too worried about it after seeing PK build the roster. Definitely agree. Old School says, love Waterman's backstory. What a great family, and what he had to go through is amazing. Definitely was a touching video to watch. I'm really excited to see him play. Jeremy Radford, will Edwards likely start at the 2 or the 3? Depends on if you start Corin Johnson and Javon Hadley. Those are the 2 players to really focus on in this, whole grand scheme of things. Babu says, looking at Frank's videos, it's pretty much dunks and block shots. Needs better hands, though. That's a perfect segue into discussing the most recent commitment. Frank Anselem from Georgia played 2 seasons with the Bulldogs after transferring in, playing 2 seasons with Syracuse, originally from Lagos, Nigeria. Now, forgive me, on his profiles, the name is Frank Anselem. I think it's Ibe, I-B-E, although I've seen a lot of people just use Anselem, regardless of whichever one it is. Hopefully I'm using it correctly. If not, I apologize. But Anselem, I'm okay with this commitment because Louisville they brought in Kenai Roots, Noah Waterman, and Kason Pryor. Just this time, like last week on Monday, I was hoping that Louisville would land one of those 3. They landed all 3. So with seemingly 1 scholarship remaining, I'm okay with adding a player that has Power 5 experience and is a veteran that can fill a depth need. I think he's going to play situational minutes next season. I don't think he's really going to be relied upon to play a major role. Perhaps I'm wrong, but just sort of reading between the tea leaves, looking at where the depth chart is right now, I'm not really convinced that he's going to have a consistent role. Like I said, I think it's the back end of the rotation, front court depth, a player who had the skill set that, even though there's not a ton of sample size, the skill set really sort of epitomizes what Kelsey's looking for in a big man. Babu says it's pretty much dunks and block shots. 92% of his offense came from around the rim this past season. Not that many shots. I mean, he averaged less than 3 points per game in each of his 4 collegiate seasons, but shot, I believe, over 60% from the field, if I'm not mistaken. 63% overall. Doesn't really have much offensive game outside of the paint. Has an offensive rebounding percentage of, I believe, like 9.7, which is really, really good. And I think, couple that with the intensity that he plays with and the almost 8% block rate, then I think he fills the role. And if you're telling me that a guy in the back end of the rotation is able to provide you situational minutes to where he can block shots, run the floor well, rebound well for his role, and also be a decent scorer, for not having to be relied upon to be a scorer, then I think you would take that. I think that if we're getting really upset over who's going to utilize the last scholarship, that's where I think things get put under a magnifying glass a little bit. He had some performances this season, especially at the end of the year, where he had 10 and 10 against Ohio State, played 27 minutes, 6 points against Seton Hall in the NIT semifinal. Really, just a couple of performances to where, you're like, okay, this guy could have a really solid impact, although, he only played 9.1 minutes per game this past season, the lowest since his freshman year. Look, I think that we have to understand what the role is going to be here. Likely, I think he's going to be in that high-energy player off the bench, end of halves, getting players breathers, foul trouble situation, you name it. I am okay with this. It's a Power 5 big man that is going to see situational minutes that I feel like could have some moments to where he has, some decent plays. One role that I think you can draw parallels to would be Okoye Agau in his in that, I think it was the 2018-19 season, where Agau didn't really play a ton, but there were some games where he played more than others, utilized his strength and size, played, to his skill set, and gave Louisville some valuable minutes when other players were getting breathers. I could see Anselem filling that same role. So I understand some are like, man, I really wish that Louisville would address this in a different way, or wish that they would have, gone with a backup guard. And I can empathize with that. I can sort of see where you're coming from. A backup guard is probably the one spot that I wanted to be filled. But at the end of the day, you are adding another serviceable player to the front court. I don't think that Louisville has a true shot blocker outside of James Scott. So having a player like Anselem be a situational shot blocker, situational rebounder, efficient around the rim, knows his role, I can't really disagree with that. Brian says that Okoye Agau was hurt most of 2018. That might be the case, but if I'm not mistaken, and maybe my memory isn't serving me correctly, but I feel like there were times during the season where he had some really solid plays. I don't think Anselem's going to be a guy that's scoring in double digits every single game, but could he have a solid game here and there? Potentially so. And if that's the case, then utilizing the last scholarship on him is worth it. Another aspect of this that you also have to consider is that with the amount of players that are going to deserve playing time this season. I mean, we talk about, yes, this team is going to go probably 10 deep in the rotation, but it's also probably hard to convince a big-time player to join the team when you have so many players competing for playing time at almost every position. Like, maybe the one position that you could convince a player that he might come in and start is if you had like a true rim protecting center that can create his own offense. But at this point, I don't really see that being the case. So adding a player like Anselem, I'm okay with it. Like, I get it's not the most flashy addition, but I'm trusting Pat Kelsey here. And that's really what it all kind of boils down to. So veteran Power 5 player with 4 years of college experience, played 4 years in the ACC, 2 years in the ACC, 2 in the SEC. There is something that I've sort of been hinting at It has been a rumor that has been swirling all throughout social media, message boards. Louisville might have another possibility to add another player. How? We'll explain why coming up here in just a quick second. Before we do that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Yahoo Finance. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. They're the number one finance destination, producing a look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Once again, that's yahoofinance.com. We're already into the final segment of this extremely impromptu live edition of Locked On Louisville. I appreciate everyone for making us your first listen every day. If you have any comments, questions, concerns that you want to drop in the comment section below, let me know what you all think. I want to talk about some comments before we talk about maybe adding another player. Getting caught up. Jordan Parrish, do we add another guard? That would be what I would do. Brian Stickler, are the red shirts not using scholarships? Give me 1 second. Babu says, I'm not concerned about guards. Hepburn, Johnson, and Smith all can play the point. All three can also play off the ball with Edwards and Hadley. I definitely agree with what you're saying there. Brian says Anselem did have 10 and 10 versus Ohio State, which pretty solid in the NIT. Yes. Brian Stickler brings up the golden question. There have been rumors circulating ever since Louisville got a commitment from Kobe Rogers that there's a possibility that Rogers might. Well, he's going to redshirt this season. And the rumor is that he's going to walk on this year, have NIL, fulfill the scholarship, and he gets placed back on scholarship when he's healthy in the 2025-26 campaign. Now, I have been of the stance that until that is confirmed, I'm going to operate under the assumption that Rogers will be on scholarship. Now, again, nothing has been confirmed either way, which is open to interpretation, whichever way you decide to look at it. However, for me, I am choosing to believe that this is my personal take. Now, don't run to Twitter or social media or Facebook Messenger or MySpace or Club Penguin or whatever platform you utilize and say that, well, Dalton Pence of Locked On Louisville said that Kobe Rogers isn't going to be on scholarship. No, we're talking about rumors here. My personal take on the matter is that if the Cardinals can find a player out there that Pat Kelsey believes can help his team next season or is worthy of a spot on this team, then it is worth looking into putting Rogers on walk-on status and then bringing him back on scholarship in 2025-26. Sort of the opposite Hersey Miller effect, where he's put on scholarship that he wasn't on scholarship. I know things like this can be very, very confusing, but with NIL, everything has changed. The landscape is so much different. You have so many more possibilities with what you can do financially. And scholarships, yes, I mean, they are important. Don't listen to people that say scholarships are not important. But at the end of the day, you have more opportunities. Jay Stay says, I think Kobe Rogers should walk on this season. Sure. I mean, last season, he was one of the better players for College of Charleston. And I don't think you can really get him on scholarship for the season after that. But I'm fine with, that course of action, him walking on and then being placed back on scholarship. Mistakes we are made. Says top 5 ACC team next season means we ranked between 50 and 75 with a smiley face. Maybe not. I mean, ACC, as I mentioned, it's so murky right now because when you look at the possible standings, I think Duke and Carolina are your two best teams. And then after that, you have a really weird group of teams or a weird sort of situation because you have 5 to 6 teams that could really be solid. Jordan Parrish says Nolan Traore. I know that some people will say, "Now I don't have any message board subscriptions, so please do forgive me for my ignorance for the lack of information." But it's my understanding that Ty Spalding, friend of the show, he's been on the show before, owner and editor of Louisville Rivals, said that Traore is a possible option, but that is unlikely that he goes to college. I mean, he is a projected top 15 pick in the 2025 draft. So anytime you have a player, especially from the international ranks, that's already playing at a high level and they're being projected as a top pick in the draft in the coming year or so, going to college, there might be a ton of risk there, but you just never know. Cards for Life says, who has the better roster, Kentucky or Louisville? I believe Louisville does, contrary to what many people will say down the I-64 East Corridor. But I think Louisville has the better roster. Jay Stay says Louisville. I think he was answering what Cards for Life says. If you have any final comments or anything, questions that you have, I'll stick around for a little bit longer to answer those. But overall, you have to be absolutely thrilled with what Pat Kelsey did this offseason. He took a narrative from we are broken to, nah, man, the program's just asleep. Let me wake everybody up and get this team to where it needs to be. He put together a very, very good roster and did so taking over less than, or maybe around 60 days ago, I would say. And having to replace all 13 guys, it's incredible. Max Corbett says, just tuning in, Dalton, is Kobe Rogers using a scholarship or not? That's sort of the thing that we're in wait and see approach. I've had multiple people tell me that it is still up in the air. I guess it really just depends on who is going to be available and if you believe that he should be given a scholarship. So Big G, top 5 ACC team is better than the worst ACC team like we've been for the last few years. You have to crawl before you can walk. This is PK's first year. Imagine what the future holds. Definitely agree there. I definitely agree with that sentiment. Jeremy Radford, what about Hawkins, NBA? Possibly. I do think if he comes back to college, I do wonder what Louisville's NIL budget is looking like right now because of adding Case and Pryor and Noah Waterman and Kenai Roots. I'm not really sure if you have the budget to go out and get a guy like Coleman Hawkins, who is probably going to command north of about $2 to $2.5 million. So, Darius, you and Marcus Maven should do a joint live sometime. I'd be open to it, man. For some reason, it feels like not many people in the city media are too fond of me for some reason. I really am not going to go too much more in depth because I don't really know the issue there. I'm not saying Marcus does, but I just haven't really been on a ton of shows. It is what it is. I would love to do a show with Marcus and Steve both. I wish we would have Kentucky's 7-footer or DJ Wagner. Yeah. Was hoping we'd get the Kentucky center, Ugonna Onyesu. I'm not necessarily sure if he's going to stay in the draft or not. We will see. Michael Singleton, 5-on-5 practices will be great for individual improvement. Agree. Dustin Norton, perfect way to round out the roster today. I agree. I like this commitment. I think that he's going to play a situational role, and ultimately that's going to, help this team at some point. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, what that looks like in terms of production, but ultimately I am hopeful that he can make some sort of an impact at the back end of the rotation. So just another minute or so for comments or anything like that. But it's crazy to see the hype, not only from the local side of things, but the national side really likes what Pat Kelsey has done. Cards for Life says this: I think we will beat Kentucky Wesleyan this year. Dalton should be a blowout. Pain. 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 Like, man, just relaying what happened these past, not even 2 years, like the past 5 years, man. I feel like since the pandemic, everything's just been a blur. It is what it is. But be sure, if you haven't already, which you probably haven't because I released it like 20 minutes before this episode, I just released a show that discusses why I believe that Louisville is a top 5 ACC team. We also identified some of the reasonable rebuttals as to why people might not think so. And we also discussed the newest football commitment, Brandon Lane from Stephen F. Austin. So last comment that we'll get to, Dustin says, last guy on the bench that knows his role will play in defensive spots, foul troubles, or injuries. PK made the perfect roster for his style. Agreed 100%. That's going to wrap up today's episode. Live impromptu episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here coming up very soon.